So this is my second attempt at filming this because turns out 18 minutes into my hour and 18 minutes of footage, my microphone stopped working. And I am recording this on the audio, I'm recording it on my microphone, which I'm not going to pick up because I feel like I've been trying to figure it out for a bit and I keep hearing like that thunk sounds. So please enjoy. If you've been on TikTok within the past couple years or so, maybe you've stumbled across the community of teenagers romanticizing the year 2014. More specifically, 2014 through the lens of Tumblr blogs. For those of us that were there, it almost makes you fossilize to think about today's teenagers wanting to be teens when we were teens. Who can blame them? Our fashion was cute. Skater skirts, Doc Martens, flannels, galaxy print. Okay, maybe not all of our fashion was cute, but most. Today, I want to take you all on a deep dive with me. For people who are around my age, get ready for the absolute whiplash coming your way. And for teens who wish they were there, or at the very least, sentient during that time, it's gonna be a ride. Here are some content warnings before we start. Tumblr was not necessarily the safest online space, despite being a safe space for a lot of us back then. This video covers topics such as self-harm, eating disorders, specifically the pro-anorexia or pro-ana community, mentions of suicide, nothing graphic, but still mentioned, mentions of mass shootings, and some mentions of racism, specifically anti-Black rhetoric. I put all these topics towards the end of the video, so if you still want to take this journey with me, I'll put a warning up before those topics are mentioned. Also, just to put it out there, YouTube has been limiting some of my videos recently. If you've noticed, my Lacy Games video got age restricted. So I will be censoring out certain words that I'd rather not have to censor out. But in the interest of not getting my content repressed, I will be censoring those words, but I will be substituting those words. Like, I'm not gonna say unalived, you know, like that's a little ridiculous. Let's get into the world of 2014 Tumblr. I want to start by talking about the subgenres of Tumblr, as I'll be calling them. This first one is probably what pops into your head right away when you hear 2014 Tumblr, and that's soft grunge, also referred to as pale grunge. The name of soft/pale grunge comes from the tags that would be used under people's posts in that community. The tags grunge, soft, and pale typically popped up, pale more than likely coming from these super pale people who were prominent in this style, but that's something we're gonna get more into later. The style finds roots in, well, grunge, which popped up in the Seattle rock scene in the 1990s. When you look at the pictures that define this style, that influence is very easily seen, from the flannels to the docs to the edgy apathetic text plastered over each post. Despite having a very prominent root, soft grunge would go on to make a cultural impact all its own. More modern aesthetics and styles would also go on to overlap with soft grunge, like minimalism and vaporwave, another aesthetic that was gaining traction at this time as well. The clean, chic look of Apple products, typically iPhones with no cases, gridline patterns, and just overall color palette wise, soft grunge had its brush with minimalism. The growing vaporwave style would share its motifs of classical sculptures, Japanese kanji, and pixel art. Unlike how vaporwave was more colorful, however, soft grunge would take these ideas and put them in black and white edits and GIFs. GIFs, is that still a debate? With the exception of Apple products, retro tech also made frequent appearances. This is where we see the resurgence of more analog forms of art, such as vinyl records and film photography with Instax or Insta-X, and Polaroids. When there were colors in soft grunge, they were usually muted or pastel colors, which we could see with the pale pinks and blues of the cameras and record players. Arguably the most popular record player at the time was the light blue Victrola suitcase record player, which usually would be posed with a vinyl of Lana Del Rey's Born to Die or Arctic Monkeys' AM. I even had one of these myself, given that it was a bit after the trend was gone. It still healed something in me. Then I realized Victrola cases are awful for your records, and I got a new one a few years ago, so rest in peace Victrola, you helped me live my 2014 Tumblr soft grunge dreams, if only for a day. While not retro, at least at the time, the Nintendo DS, particularly its PictoChat application, was also a prominent motif, which, while it seems random, it's speculated that PictoChat was used due to its Japanese connection. Everything from this aesthetic at this time seemed to need a brand, from the tech to the clothes and even the water. Yes, bottled water. Brands such as Evian, Voss, Fiji, Boxed Water, and of course, Blackwater, which stood out for its black color. More than likely, it was due to their aesthetically pleasing packaging that stood out among your Aquafinas and Dasanis. Fiji would also go on to find popularity in the vaporwave scene later on. As for clothing brands, Nike and Adidas made frequent appearances, which would in turn forecast the rise of streetwear culture that would dominate social media outside of Tumblr. Other popular brands that weren't related to sportswear were seen on their shoes. Converse, Checkered Vans, and Doc Martens were the go-tos. I could also be making this up, but I remember Rip and Dip and their cat pocket shirt being popular around this time and in this scene too. You know, the one where like you pull the pocket down, the cat's like flipping you off. But I found no evidence of this, and I'm going solely off of fuzzy, decade-old plus memories. This sort of fine line, cartoony style was popular when clothes had graphics on them, as most clothes were typically like a plain pattern or just a solid color, but when they did have graphics on them, it would typically be something like that. Or I remember alien heads being really popular on these types of clothing. Beyond brand names, clothing items such as pleated tennis skirts, skinny, ripped, cuffed jeans, denim jackets, of course, flannels, flower crowns, beanies, fishnets, especially fishnets under jeans, and knee socks. I want to know really what came first. Did the knee socks become trendy first and then Arctic Monkeys made the song knee
That's okay, take your time.
knee socks? Or like what came first? I'm really making you think on this channel. One trending item from the scene that actually wasn't a clothing item were penny boards. Soft grunge definitely had some overlap with skater culture, and penny boards were the unique spin they put on it. My guess is due to how like aesthetically pleasing they looked. Now, I'm a wuss who just started learning how to skateboard at the ripe age of 24, and I could barely ride in a straight line for more than 2 seconds without holding on to my boyfriend's shoulders for dear life, but even I wanted a penny board so bad, and I was pissed that I couldn't afford one. But to wrap this up, the two people that I think really encapsulates the overall aesthetic of soft grunge, or Tumblr grunge as I remember people calling it before it had an actual name, would be 2014 Cara Delevingne and 2016 Acacia Brindley, which she could be a whole video all on herself. Now, let's move on to another controversial aesthetic that dominated Tumblr: pastel goth. Pastel goth was an aesthetic that involved making creepy cute, like bats, ghosts, and skeletons, and bones in general. Randy Moon actually has a mini-series on their YouTube channel about different Tumblr styles and aesthetics, where they go much more into detail about the roots of each aesthetic, and they go into more depth, and they covered pastel goth in one of their videos, and I'm gonna link that below. I think if you're into any form of Tumblr nostalgia, that series is just gonna bring so much back. Some trademarks of the pastel goth aesthetic included pastel skies and galaxies, because everything was galaxy back then, inverted crosses, eyeball bows, the yin-yang symbol for some reason, and drip patterns, usually drippy fonts. Drippy fonts were like my favorite thing to draw when I was in 8th grade, like in my class notes. If I took any pictures of it, like I'll put it here, and honestly a lot of the examples of pastel goth are gonna come from my Google Photos, because even though you couldn't tell by looking at me, I loved pastel goth at the time. I even made pastel goth clothes on my copy of Animal Crossing New Leaf in my Able Sister shop, which are still there, by the way. This aesthetic was fairly controversial at the time, but not for nearly any of the reasons why soft grunge was. It mainly came down to the usage of the goth label, with the debate of whether or not it counted as real goth. Some argued it wasn't simply just due to its usage of pastel colors, and others argued that because goth is a music-based subculture, pastel goth didn't count because it didn't have any music or artists associated with it. And that's low-key still the case today. If I had to list some artists that could be considered pastel goth, I'd probably say Melanie Martinez would be one of the common denominator artists with the pastel goth scene that pops up a lot. Maybe I'd also throw in Jasmine Bean just off of looks alone, but I haven't listened to a whole lot of her music, so my judgment may be off. Another artist that gives off that pastel goth vibe is Poppy, or as she was known as at the time, That Poppy. Although at the time she was a straight up bubblegum pop artist, with her Bubble Bath EP coming out around that time. The song Creepy Girls by Ghost Town is a song I remember being popular within that scene at the time, but Ghost Town themselves are more like emo scene music. I actually found a Reddit forum that was uploaded just a year ago about the types of music that would be associated with pastel goth, and it's still a clusterfuck of artists. With this being a more recent post and pastel goth being around for more than a decade at this point, there still isn't a decided on type of music that defines the subculture. Over the years, people have softened up to the idea of pastel goth being a form of goth style, and pastel goths have been existing rather peacefully in their own corner of the internet ever since. Pastel goth wasn't the most popular aesthetic to use pastels, however. This next aesthetic really doesn't have a name, but the aesthetics wiki, because of course that's a thing, which, by the way, thank you so much, it helped me a ton with the making of this video, calls it 2014 girly. I like to call them DSLR girlies, as one of their defining features was how they would take a lot of pictures using a DSLR camera, or how they would take mirror selfies to show off their camera. In a way, this was like the predecessor of the Bisco girls of the late 2010s. If I had to explain this aesthetic in just a couple words, it would be middle school. But also I was in middle school at the time, so maybe I'm a little biased. But also, it was mainly middle school girls who took part in this aesthetic. While it wasn't just them, they were the majority. This aesthetic has actually made kind of a comeback recently, either from adults who lived through this era and missed it, or from current teenagers who love the aesthetic and wishes they could be a teen in 2014. When I tell you, when those started hitting my feed, I was like, this is fake, yeah? I think people my age were like, I wish I was a teenager in the 90s. Like, that's how we were. So I have no room to speak. Like its soft grunge counterpart, 2014 girly had its own brands that were popular within their group. Victoria's Secret / Pink, UGG, Maybelline, more specifically their Baby Skin line of products, Yankee Candle, Lush, Forever 21, and Starbucks due to their sweet and pretty looking drinks. And as I was writing the script, I was writing that part when I was in a Starbucks, so I feel like it all came kind of full circle, because I remember taking pictures of my little frappuccinos and stuff when I used to go to Starbucks when I was younger. Now, given I don't give my money to Starbucks, I am an ex-supervisor from there, I would never give them my money. Other popular stylistic choices that were big in that corner of Tumblr included floral patterns, Brandy Melville, those, pink tops, peplum shirts, Converse, specifically the white ones, EOS lip balm, which, let's be real, barely worked, and Essie nail polish. DIY projects were also a huge factor in building this specific style. Popular DIY YouTubers at the time included Gabby DiMartino, My Life is Eva, Bethany Moda, and Wenji, my personal favorite at the time. Now, this aesthetic actually had a really defined music taste, even if it was just 95% radio pop. Taylor Swift, Becky G, Charlie XCX during her more preppy boom clap era, Tove Lo, and boy bands such as One Direction and 5 Seconds of Summer. Although 14-year-old me and my friends swore up and down that 5 Seconds of Summer were pop punk and not a boy band, because boy bands can't be pop punk. They simply can't coexist or the world will explode. The biggest influence, arguably, was Ariana Grande. Her music, fashion, and makeup style was the blueprint for these girls. Our big name blogs included the infamous Just Girly Things, which would later go on to unite the internet by using their blog to come out as a lesbian, despite being known as the stereotypical straight white girl blog. And yet again, Acacia Brindley. Girl's been around the internet, man. Name a style and she's done it. Between girly Tumblr and soft grunge Tumblr, I remember there being sort of an unspoken competition between them. As soft grunge tended to attract the not like most girls type of person, which I was that type of person, so I have no room to judge. And the girly Tumblr users consisted of more preppy and in turn more popular girls. So it was kind of like just an online extension of like the emos versus preps type thing that most of us fell victim to. I did, at least. So yeah, a breeding ground for unresolved female teenage angst. Speaking of teenage angst, the mid-2010s included the decline of MySpace popularity-wise, so Tumblr was a great alternative for emo refugees to make blogs on. This helped to bring on the so-called fourth wave of emo. Now, while emo is definitely its own beast in and of itself, Tumblr emo was rather distinct. And although we're talking Tumblr here, YouTube became a major building block for this community. Major YouTubers at that time included Dan and Phil, Brian Starr / My Digital Escape, which if you're interested in My Digital Escape, I made a video. My last video is about Austin Jones from My Digital Escape, a deep dive into him, and I will be going on a deep dive into every member of My Digital Escape, so subscribe if you want to see that. I'm so good at promos. Des and Nate, Crank That Frank, Matt G124, D Fizzy, Christian Novelli, Tyler Hagen, Onision, Shane Dawson, One Eye, Eugenia Cooney, god it gets worse, Minty Oreos, Lita Monster Bunny, which those two were not bad, from what I know. But even then, I'm forgetting so many. But there was a lot of emo YouTubers that influenced the fashion and humor at the time. Fashion staples of the mid-2010s emo kids remained pretty similar to their mid-2000s counterparts. Skinny jeans, Converse, or black and white checkered Vans, studded and or checkered belts, beanies, and of course, band shirts was the usual uniform for 2010s emo. Ask me how I know. It's still how I dress. That's embarrassing. Music was not forgotten, however. Bands popular with the emos at this time included the Emo Quartet. If I had a nickel for every time the Emo Quartet was mentioned in one of my videos, I'd have 2 nickels.
It's more nickels than you think.
But included Panic! At the Disco, My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy, and 21 Pilots. Although I remember some discourse about, like, Paramore should take place of one of the bands in the emo quartet, which usually people either argued that 21 Pilots or Panic! At the Disco should be replaced by Paramore. There was still some overlap with the soft grunge scene, such as Halsey and Melanie Martinez being a fan in both communities. While emo was still very much its own thing, they did have overlap with other Tumblr scenes at the time, like the aforementioned soft grunge and fandom Tumblr. In this section, I'm gonna go kind of back and forth between covering emo and fandom Tumblr, as they both did have a lot in common and I honestly can't see a big distinction in my mind. Although the 2010s emo revival was a thing at the time, I was one of the only emo kids, if not the only emo kid in my school or grade, so my perspective is probably a bit skewed, and I was part of both sides of Tumblr, so to me they both kind of seem the same in my head. As for the fandom side, Super Hulock dominated people's timelines. Super Hulock, for those who aren't familiar, and in which case I am so jealous of you, is the combined fandom name for the shows Supernatural, Doctor Who, and BBC Sherlock, respectively. I would do a whole separate section on Super Hulock, but I honestly don't know what I'd say other than they like these shows. They made quirky text posts, dedicated their lives to the fucking things. Oh! Maybe the fact that Supernatural Gifts ran the website. It was like our own Rule 34. If it exists, there's a Supernatural GIF about it. I haven't really been on the website in a hot minute, so maybe that's still a thing today, but I have so many old posts archived that reference this phenomenon. If there's a Super Hulock story or piece of lore that I'm missing, I would love to hear all about it and maybe make a video on it. Both fandom and emo Tumblr were both extremely guilty of shipping culture. And if you're unaware, which again, I'm so jealous of you, shipping is the act of basically wanting two, sometimes more, not usually, people, usually fictional, but not always, to date or partake in a relationship of some kind. People who participate in shipping culture might write fanfiction, make fan edits, or have small communities where they'll discuss these yearned after relationships. It can get toxic, sometimes parasocial, but when I participated in it, it was fun, and I made a lot of friends I still talk to today because of it. So it wasn't all bad as much as it sounds like I'm talking it. Certain relationships, known as ships, were very popular all around Tumblr, pretty much regardless of what side of the website you were on. Popular ships included Fan, the ship of Dan and Phil, Destiel, the ship between Dean and Castiel from Supernatural, Johnlock, the ship of John and Sherlock from Sherlock, Ferrard, the ship of Gerard and Frank from My Chemical Romance, Ryden, the ship of Ryan and Brendan from Panic! At the Disco, and this might be a deep cut, Kick the Sticks, the ship name for Kick the PJ and Crabsticks, who were, at the time, frequent collaborators with Dan and Phil, and they were all known as the Fantastic Foursome. They both still make content. I know PJ still makes content. I don't know if Crabstick still makes content, but... Now, while I can't cover every single ship that was popular on Tumblr at the time, those were the standouts in my head. Now, for what separated the different sides of Tumblr, music was also one of the few things that brought them together. While music tastes did vary depending on what side of Tumblr you were on, there were some consistent repeats across the board. No matter where you went, these guys were damn near inescapable. First off, we have the infamous Lana Del Rey, with notable works at this time being, of course, Born to Die and Ultraviolence. I got into her when one of my friends from my gay emo kick chat from middle school made me a playlist of music to get into. I might still have a screenshot of, but I remember being like 30 to 40% just Lana Del Rey, and I don't think it gets more 2014 than that. Arctic Monkeys also exploded in popularity at this time. Although these two came a bit before this era, Favorite Worst Nightmare and Humbug, they both had songs that'll show up when you type in Tumblr playlist on Spotify. But 2011's Suckin' and C and 2013's AM became the sound that defined the website, especially AM. It was very much a unique sound at the time that captured the true soft grunge aspect. On nearly the opposite end of the spectrum, Marina, or as she was known at the time, Marina and the Diamonds, had a very pop-y sound with lyrics that juxtaposed the happy instrumentals. Me personally, I didn't discover her through Tumblr edits, like a lot of people did. I actually found her through her song Oh No being on Just Dance 4 for the Wii. For some reason, I have 2 copies of this game. I don't know. I think this one's the older one, because it's almost $40, whereas this one is $7. So, popular works of Marina at the time include The Family Jewels, Electra Heart, and Fruit, which to me, Fruit still seems like a new album despite being almost 10 years old. At this time, YouTubers were also getting in on the music game. Shane Dawson, Shawn Mendes, Joji/Filthy Frank, it seemed like the new trend. While some would end up dropping their music after a bit, Troye Sivan is one who has kept at it. He didn't have much music out at the time, but his EP TRXYE and his debut album Blue Neighborhood made a big impact online and even in the mainstream. His debut single, Happy Little Pill, was well received right from the start. When it came out, before I even listened to it, I ripped the MP3 from one of those sketchy YouTube to MP3 sites, loaded it directly onto my Samsung Galaxy S3, and listened to it through my $5 Skull Candy earbuds while on my way to church youth group. Absolutely life-changing. Now, I'm gonna go through a bit of a lightning round, as these are all artists that I wasn't super into at the time, but I genuinely cannot not talk about these artists in a video about 2014 Tumblr. The XX, who I haven't heard about until researching this video, although I did recognize their album covers, seemed to succeed on Tumblr with their self-titled album and their album Coexist. I couldn't really tell what their big albums were, but these were the ones that popped up the most often, so apologies if I'm way off. The Neighborhood, best known for their song Sweater Weather, blew up on the site through works like I Love You, with a period, duh, and Wiped Out. They really like their punctuation, that's cute. And finishing up with our The Artists, the 1975 saw fame online with their self-titled album, and I Like It When You Sleep, for You Are So Beautiful, Yet So Unaware of It. It rolls off the tongue. For our final band, but not our final artist, Cage the Elephant was also a recurring name at the time, with works such as Melophobia and Tell Me I'm Pretty. Their song Cigarette Daydreams was also popular around that time, if I'm remembering correctly, because, well, cigarettes. Can't be a true Tumblr girl without them. If you were a true Tumblr girl, what cigarettes did you smoke? What was the brand? Moving on to our final solo artists, Charli XCX, who is still a huge star today, was originally known more for her features than her, actual songs, such as her feature on I Love It by Icona Pop and Fancy by Iggy Azalea. Although her song Boom Clap did appear in the soundtrack for the movie adaptation of John Green's The Fault in Our Stars, it was on her 2014 album Sucker! Now, how can I make a video on 2014 Tumblr without mentioning Halsey? Her 2015 debut album, Badlands, had Tumblr in an absolute chokehold. Her songs New Americana and Colors were arguably the most well-known off the album, and Gasoline actually just got a music video this year. Lorde was another name who had just burst onto the scene, with Royals being absolutely all over the radio when she was just 16 years old. Her debut works from the time, the Love Club EP and Pure Heroin, went on to become classics, with the Tennis Court EP following suit. I'd even argue 2017's Melodrama was a carryover from this era, despite being a little bit after this era's heyday. I will say, while styles like 2014 girly evolved fast, soft grunge took a hot minute to fully fade away and lasted for a good chunk of the 2010s. Finally, I'm ending off with Sky Ferreira. Either you have no clue who she is, or you're a devout fan. She only had 1 album and 3 EPs at this time: Nighttime My Time, As If, Ghost, and Nighttime My Time, the B-Sides, Part 1. Her big breakout hit was Everything Is Embarrassing, which I finally heard for the first time not too long ago, and I actually really liked it. She is allegedly dropping her second album, Masochism, sometime this year, but according to my friend, who is a Sky Ferreira fan, that is a very loose alleged. Alright, that was a lot. As you can tell, music was a huge influence on Tumblr at the time, still is now, but we're talking about then. And a lot of these artists would sing about subjects like drugs, drinking, and heartbreak. And while they were undeniable hits, it sure didn't help the promoting self-harm allegations levied against Tumblr. Those content warnings I mentioned earlier are about to come into play, so to refresh, for the rest of this video, we will be talking about topics such as self-harm, eating disorders, specifically pro-Ana and the pro-Ana community, mentions of suicide, nothing graphic, but mentions of mass and mass violence, and some mentions of racism, specifically anti-Black rhetoric. If these are not safe topics for you, take care of yourself, and I hope to see you in the next video, and thank you so much for tuning in. Now without further ado, let's dive into the dark sides of Tumblr. Self-harm content was always a prevalent issue on Tumblr, with them banning blogs that actively promote self-harm, and moderating blogs that glorify or promote anorexia, and other eating disorders. This is where we get the term for pro-Ana. These blogs are solely for promoting their anorexia and encouraging others with disordered eating behaviors. These blogs would encourage others not to eat, and some would post workouts to attain certain pro-Ana beauty standards, such as the infamous thigh gap trend at the time. We can actually see a lot of this cycle repeating today on TikTok, hiding under the guise of wellness and fitness and clean eating, etc. Maybe this could even be part of the reason why 2014 Tumblr has been glorified so much in recent months. I know a lot of it has to do with how aesthetically pleasing the time looked and how simple things seemed, the final glory days before social media and technology completely overtook our lives. Eating disorders were unfortunately not the only way self-harm and other self-destructive behaviors spread on the platform. Posts that would spread included imagery of self-harm, scars, bruises, cigarettes, and pills. This type of content would resonate with mostly a teenage girl audience, along with hard-hitting lyrics, namely those from Lana Del Rey. But what about this imagery resonated with teenagers? In a Jezebel article all about this very topic, they spoke with that audience. One says, quote, "I think I was attracted to that imagery because it was a place where I wasn't shamed for, or made to feel uncomfortable about, my own extreme sensibility and femininity. When I first listened to Lana, I had the most cathartic realization ever. I could be sad and miserable and still make my life beautiful and worth living, even if just as a performance." So art was very much used as an emotional outlet, as a way to romanticize their lives and the hard times that they're going through. However, Lana Del Rey would fall under heavy scrutiny during this time, with the rise of mid-2010s feminism. Both Lana and Tumblr became the most popular at a time when feminism meant having a very positive attitude towards womanhood, being independent, wanting power, self-love. Unlike the empowerment core artists of the time, like Katy Perry, Kelly Clarkson, and Taylor Swift, Jenna told me that Lana was different because Lana was not interested in being a savior, and I think people found that particularly uncomfortable. This is a dicey debate, but yes, being able to deal with pain through art can be a good thing and even a healthy coping skill. Sometimes this type of content had a way of breaching containment, so to speak, and it would reach its way to younger people. And they would look to these beautiful posts, and at that time it would be one of their few exposures to mental health and general coping skills. Even though this was only 10 years ago, mental health still wasn't talked about back then the way it is now. But this wouldn't be the only harmful community that teens were exposed to on Tumblr. Not to be confused with the teacher crush community of the same acronym, the true crime community is a Tumblr community that glorifies criminals, mainly mass shooters and serial killers. I'd argue the main fixations of this group were the 1999 Columbine shooters, which was at the time the school shooting in American history. This was mainly in part due to how much we know about the perpetrators, being teenage boys at the time, full of rage, sadness, and the urge to seek revenge on a school they hated. For a lot of American teenagers, these were thoughts that they could relate to in one way or another. This was the case with 19-year-old James Gamble, who ran a fairly well-known blog in the community. Through a game facts board of all places, he met 23-year-old Lindsay Cantha Savannarath from Geneva, Illinois, and 20-year-old Randall Stephen Shepard from Timberlake, Nova Scotia, Canada, where Gamble also resided. All three ran blogs about the Columbine perpetrators, with Nazi imagery also littering their timelines. Throughout their numerous online conversations, they began to plot to commit a mass shooting in the Halifax Shopping Center in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Now, this would-be massacre was set to take place on Valentine's Day 2015. They got fairly far into their planning, and if it wasn't for the police being tipped off, who knows how far this would have gone. After landing in Canada, Savannarath was arrested by police, as well as Shepard, who was meeting her there. Gamble would ultimately take his own life before the police could arrest him. Shepard and Savannarath were both charged with conspiracy to commit murder conspiracy to commit arson, illegal possession of weapons for dangerous purposes against the public, and making threats over social media. Shepard pleaded guilty to the charge of conspiracy to commit murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, minus the 974 days as time served. Savannah Rath pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, despite originally saying she was just going to Nova Scotia just to meet Gamble, her boyfriend, where she claimed they only planned to take their own lives. Savannah Rath was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 10 years. She would later appeal this sentence, saying it was, quote, flawed and manifestly harsh and excessive, but it was later denied on May 29, 2019. She was denied parole in August of 2025, which is very recent. Shepard would be paroled into a halfway house in fall 2021 and lasted until fall 2024 and was barred from using the internet at that time. While this case is very much a rare occurrence, and obviously not everyone in the TCC would plan something like this, it's definitely an issue that the community faces. It's not really a surprise though, as a community based on viewing in a positive light is definitely going to attract those types of people. Some blogs would claim that they don't condone, as in they don't condone the actions of the people that they blog about. But as someone who was familiar with the TCC back then, some simply slapped that onto their blog so they wouldn't get into any trouble, legal or otherwise. I started getting into actual true crime around 2015, starting with classic, mostly harmless media like Forensic Files and Dateline, and through looking these cases up online to research more into it, plus being an avid Tumblr user at the time, I fell down the rabbit hole. Now luckily I didn't get into the whole, oh my god, they were small innocent little beings, oh my god, like a good chunk of the community was at the time. My interest did get me into trouble a few times in high school, as most people saw my interest in true crime as disturbing or concerning. That was until true crime podcasts would later go on to explode in popularity. I'm not salty about this at all still, what are you talking about? And honestly, that's where a lot of TCC people start. I feel like that sort of shaming for interest for things like true crime was probably what caused this group to splinter off in the first place. Although, yes, there are people who genuinely idolize and find these people attractive, regardless of whether or not they were treated poorly or well or however. The true crime community latched onto aesthetics like soft grunge, and some of their posts are near indecipherable from the typical Lana Del Rey lyrics type of post, which exposed all kinds of people to their posts and thus their community. Although this era of Tumblr can be defined by the rise of social justice and feminism, some parts of the website still lagged behind. Tumblr's it girl at the time, Acacia Brindley, which take a shot every time I bring her up, was very much guilty of racist behavior, using the N-word on many occasions and using her black sister as the punchline for many jokes. And I wasn't able to find anything from the time, but I do remember there being discourse about how predominantly white these subgenres of Tumblr were, with very little diversity in skin tone, and the white people that were shown in pictures were typically extremely pale. It's at least mentioned on the aesthetics wiki, so I know I'm not just making stuff up, so at least someone remembers it, but I couldn't really find any specific posts talking about it. And yeah, looking back on it, and even searching any variant of 2014 Tumblr soft grunge, you get the picture. The results are overwhelmingly dominated by white girls. Although the diversity today while searching on Tumblr is better, definitely better than it was back then, when we romanticize or yearn to go back to these kinds of times, at what point are we not bringing our old prejudices with us? Forgive me, I'm gonna be white person standing on soapbox for the next 2 seconds. But we see the comeback of diet culture and heroin chic, something most of us swore off 10 years ago. Not even. So yes, while we can enjoy 2014 Tumblr culture and bring it back, some things should ultimately just be left in the past. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive of 2014 Tumblr. I hope you enjoyed. I hope the makeup and the space buns do not go unappreciated. I tried to do space buns, they kind of fell apart. I figured with fall coming in, something about fall is just very 2014 Tumblr soft grunge. Something about it. So I wanted to make a video as we are heading into the fall season. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any other topics you would like me to cover, or any specific Tumblr things you'd want me to cover, let me know in the comments. If you were around at the time, if you were around on Tumblr back then, what's something you remember from that era of the internet? What was your go-to aesthetic? Whether you were a soft grunge girly or a pastel goth, you know? Let me know, I want to hear all about it. And if you're one of those teenagers who yearns to be part of 2014 Tumblr, let me know why. I'm curious. I want to know. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this video and you like my other videos, please be sure to like and comment and subscribe and all that fun stuff. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.